Welcome to Thriving in Your Third Act, a free online event featuring bold women leaders who are sharing their favorite tips, tools, and practices to help you find fire and fulfillment after 50. Share this event with your friends and family and come join us on Facebook at the Shift Network. And now your host, Sabrina Chaw.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be introducing you to Linda and Charlie Bloom, who are the first couple we've had on our summit. I really wanted them to be part of the summit, not only for the workshops and teachings called Outrageous Aging, but also because they've been together for 50 years and are co-authors of 4 books on relationships. They specialize in working with groups, individuals, couples, and organizations to enhance the quality of their relationships and communication skills. Linda and Charlie, welcome.
Thank you for having us. I'm delighted to be here with you, Sabrina.
Me too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So let's get right into it. I love the phrase that you have about outrageous aging. What is your definition of outrageous aging?
Well, when you look it up in the dictionary, the word outrageous, it says grossly offensive to the sense of decency, shocking, passing reasonable bounds. And I feel that we need something strong, like outrageous, to go in the face, fly in the face of the prevailing view about aging, about being a has-been, the best is behind us, that we ought to just quiet down and go away. And I think that to stand up to the prevailing prejudice against aging, that we need something really strong. We need a new story.
Totally agree. And how about you, Charlie? I mean, the whole notion of passing reasonable bounds, what would be unreasonable bounds for you?
Well, I think we've got to be willing to be unreasonable, which means defying the cultural norms that have been assigned to us. We haven't really lived in accordance, most of us, with our own inner guidance for most of our lives. The programming to conform to cultural expectations, what we call reasonable. The spoken and unspoken rules of and values that we're expected and kind of required to conform to, that we've got to be willing to be radically ourselves, to be radically authentic. And radical, the root of the word radical means to go to the root, to the core of something, to live from our core values, as opposed to living in accordance with the assigned cultural values. And I'm not just talking about our culture, because all cultures do this to some degree. There are very few cultures that really put a strong emphasis on individuating from the norms, from what's reasonable. So it's a challenge, and we have to be able and willing to make something more important than avoiding judgment or rejection from cultural values.
Beautifully said, Charlie. So do you and Linda have a way of going beyond the spoken rules? I mean, how do we get past those messages that we get? Oh, you're too old to wear that. Oh, it's too late to start this career. Or you can't go for your master's now. I mean, yeah, right. So how do we go past that? What is the inner work that you recommend that we do to do that?
Thank you for the question. And it's that clarity and that conviction that where we are living from really suits us, that it is uniquely suited. So I have people say to me, oh, you're in your 70s and you're not retired yet? And they're sort of surprised, because most of the people our age they've been retired for some years. And I make it a point of saying, I think I'm probably going to work until I drop, as long as I don't lose my marbles. I'm loving what I'm doing. I can't imagine what I would like to do more than this. I'm changing the proportion of the work and play, but it comes from that clarity within. I know I'm living the life that really lights me up. And so if other people have judgments about it, or they think that I'm foolish to still be working at this age and still writing books and all the things that I'm doing, I'm enjoying it. I'm blessed that I can do it with my beloved, and that makes it even more wonderful for me. So I can't imagine what I would rather do.
Mm. Well, that sounds very clear, Linda. And what are some of the comeback lines that you give to people who say, "Well, shouldn't you be retired now?" Or some of the other messages they keep on wanting to perpetuate?
Most of those people are retired already. And
Right.
maybe they had work that they didn't love. And so it was right for them to let go and do other things, to play with their grandkids or travel, whatever they do. And I respect that as we age, we have the right to make the choices that work for us. We've earned that right, that we're not doing things out of duty, obligation, must, have to, and to get approval from other people. We come from that really wise, knowing place inside of what is right for us.
Yes, very clear. And you both have lived quite a journey together in this lifetime, and most people would agree that, especially now in this nation and in this world, with climate change, with populism and all that, there's a lot of cynicism and despair, and people are going to addictions to numb themselves out with what's going on now. What can we do to prevent ourselves from falling into this frame of mind when feelings of hopelessness and helplessness arise?
Well, I don't think it's possible to prevent yourself from falling into it on occasion. I think anybody who doesn't is probably not fully awake. It's, we're up against some formidable challenges. And it's understandable that at times we're going to feel discouraged. We're going to feel pessimistic. We might even feel feelings of hopelessness and despair. But if we can hold those feelings mindfully, then we won't get possessed by them. And the real challenge is not necessarily to not feel certain things, but the opposite. It's to lean into them and allow ourselves to experience the depth of whatever it is that we're feeling, whether it's elation, joy, fear, hopelessness. Because one of the things that I've learned in this journey is that if I can fully experience the even feelings that are very distressing or uncomfortable, if I can really surrender to them and not resist them and not distract myself with other things like drugs, then guess what's going to happen? The feeling is going to pass. And it does 100% of the time. One of the things that we have to really recover from in the culture that we've all been conditioned to accept is that when we have difficult experiences, that we have to somehow get out of that. We have to somehow get free of it. We have to somehow become disengaged from it. And one of the things that we can do when we're willing to be outrageous is to lean into it, to take the risk of really feeling whatever it is that's there.
It's a very empowering statement, Charlie, and I love that, especially in this with the opioid epidemic and with antidepressants people are taking all the time. I mean, it's. I love what you're saying, to really lean into our feelings instead of disengaging in them.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would add, I'm totally with Charlie about what he is speaking about, but I would add that the going into the dark place, the way to come through it to the light on the other side more efficiently and more quickly is to experience it through and not to be caught and trapped there, but to reach out and ask for assistance. The archetype of the orphan who feels so alone with their despair and depression really is crushing. And it is easy to get into a dark place, not just in the youth worshiping culture that we live in that thinks that you should be cast out on the garbage heap, but also because we sustain many grievous losses of important people in our life as we age. And when we go into that dark and lonely place, the antidote is to find hope and to reach out and to ask for help, to begin to trust again that life is good and that it isn't necessarily so that the best is behind me. It open to the possibility that there are other good things coming. Maybe even the best could be ahead, and be in that kind of a don't know mind. I'm big on networking, on social relationships with family and friends and community. And I love John Robbins' book, Healthy at 100, who talks about the long-lived peoples around the world,
Mm-hmm.
that they all have in common that they're really well networked with family and community and friendship. And it's more important than what they eat or how much they exercise or their economic status or even whether they smoke or not. Their longevity and their health and well-being has to do with how well networked they are.
Wow. That's a very revelating piece of information. And Linda, you bring up a really good point about the whole thing about community and networking. And one of the things I wonder about is, especially for people over 50, 60, 70, they're still caring for others. Some people I know are still caring for their kids, even though they're grown-up kids. They're supporting them financially. The kids have moved back in the house, even though they're in their 30s, right? And some, they're also maybe caring for their elderly parents who are just on the brink of their life ending. So one of the questions I have is, how do we provide for our own self-care while simultaneously dedicating ourselves to supporting others? I mean, is it like reaching out for community more, or what are some of the other things that you suggest?
Well, Sabrina, you've just touched on the question, the primary fundamental challenge of living with the challenge of moving into the stage of our lives, which is that we have to fulfill two seemingly contradictory needs that seem to be mutually exclusive, but they're not. And one of them is exactly what you said. One of them is the need to provide myself with responsible, compassionate self-care, to have that as a high priority. And the other one is to be absolutely committed to the well-being of the person or people in my life with whom I'm close. And most of us are predisposed to favor one end of that spectrum or the other. Some people are really good at taking care of themselves, but they tend not to be as conscious about taking care of the relationship. Other people, it's the opposite. Our challenge is to become more competent on both sides of that spectrum. And it requires the cultivation and the development of certain personal traits, qualities, and skills. And that's a lot of what our work is with people and with couples, to help them to develop and to master the skill of being able to be strong in both sides of that equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Charlie, you just mentioned those qualities, those traits that we need to develop to have both the ability to provide self-care and to be committed to the well-being of others. Can you or Linda talk a little bit more about what those traits are? And
I'm really very fond of the whole idea of archetypal psychology. So there are certain stages that we go through, and there are tasks that we have to master. So when we're in the martyr, or also known as the caregiver stage, we learn about commitment. We learn about devotion. We learn about generosity of spirit, and we practice those fine qualities. In the warrior stage, we learn to draw boundaries so that we don't overgive, so that we say, I can give this much, but if I do that, then I'm taking it out of my cells and my own health and well-being while I'm busy being devoted to you. And so we have tasks to master in those two areas. Also, there is a balance. We may need to go overboard with the caregiving before we can draw our boundaries in and, get hired help, maybe put our relative who doesn't want to go into a care facility because it's running down our own health. And so it's this mindfulness again that Charlie's already mentioned about taking the time, the contemplative time, to see what's really true for us, so that we're not overdoing it in the generosity and service department, but we're not being, too careful about our boundaries when we're doing our warrior work, and that we need to be accomplished in both domains.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you both suggest any practices that we can do, take on ourselves, or maybe lead us through a short one now, where we can be both a warrior in drawing boundaries and also be the devoted, committed, generosity and spirit caregiver that we often find ourselves in?
Oh, great question. Yeah, let me use an example of the quality of courage, which is something that will benefit our commitment to this development in practically every case. I mean, it's something that we're going to need, because it takes courage to challenge the prevailing system. And it's not the external outside system, but it's our internal belief system that we have to be willing to take on, to challenge. So if in the process of doing our work, we recognize that I've got some risks here that I've got to be willing to take. And of course, it always requires courage to be willing to step into the challenge of taking a risk, a risk to let go of something, a risk to upset a relationship or another person, a risk to defy certain standards that we have perhaps the fear of being punished for if we don't do it. And so if courage is something that I really have a commitment to developing more of in my life, the way that can happen is to identify anything that comes up in my life that feels like it's a challenge, that feels like it's a risk. The default that most of us have to some degree is, when we are faced with something that feels risky, to take the path of least resistance and to take the safer path that probably will not create more courage, because courage is built on the basis of being able to stand in the face of a challenge and a risk and be willing to step into it. And so whenever we recognize that, we can remind ourselves, okay, I have a choice now. And the choice is I can, do what my default is, which is to, try to avoid this, or what would it look like for me to take a step into this? And it doesn't have to be a very dramatic, huge, life-changing step. It can be something small. What's a step that I can take that will at least move me in this direction? We can practice strengthening our courage muscle by identifying places, things that come up in our life. And I guarantee you that in all of our lives, there are opportunities to exercise this muscle on a daily basis. Sometimes very small things, but it doesn't matter whether it's big or small. What matters is that we're aware, okay, I've got a choice now, and the willingness to step into that, and the willingness to say, you know what, I'd rather not. I think this time I'm going to pass on this because I just don't feel up to it right now. And to be okay with that. And then we get to develop the quality of forgiveness and self-forgiveness when we don't have perfectionistic expectations of ourselves. And we can give those expectations to other people in our relationships, so we become less judgmental. So sometimes, we can actually work on developing multiple qualities simultaneously, depending upon what the nature of the commitment is.
Thank you for that really thorough answer, Charlie. One of the things you mentioned is, and this is in alignment with what Linda mentioned about drawing boundaries. When we think about developing that courage and recognizing a choice and maybe even taking small steps in the right direction, sometimes I think that requires just letting go of current friendships that don't serve that direction, that purpose. So people who could be very discouraging and cynical and just really is not supportive. What do you both recommend in that? I mean, how do we become a warrior in drawing boundaries and really stand in our truth with those who just not only don't support us, but actually can discourage us? Do we just let go of them? Do we try to, lift them up on the path, or support them on, help them find theirs? Or what do you recommend?
I think it's a real fine line. Do you know you can make yourself really unpopular if you're giving unsolicited advice to people? They have to indicate a willingness and an openness to want to hear it. I say live it by example. And, some of these people who are so cynical and downers and victim-y, and, some of them are in our own family, or they've been in our friendship network for a long time. And I would say that we wouldn't necessarily cut those people out of our life, but we may want to love them from afar and not be with them as much, because it does get on us. And we need all of our strength and all of our positivity if we are going to be a wise elder rather than just an elderly person. And so we want to go on a quest to find the people who are aging well. Charlie and I are blessed to have some wise elders in our tribe. We're still on a quest looking for more. They're so inspirational. And our friend Doug Von Koss, who's in his 80s, well into his 80s, he says, I'm getting better and better as I age. I'm moving into the magnificent. And I'm so inspired by being around him. He's still working, he's still traveling, he's still teaching. He's got all this gorgeous poetry committed to memory, and he speaks it from the deepest part of his soul. And I'm inspired by being around these people who are aging so beautifully. So I think we can make room with our generosity of spirit for some of the people who are not so advanced on the path, who may have, I don't know, they're maybe made the choice for the comfort and security rather than the courage and risk way of life that will bring us to become a wise elder. And we need to have some compassion for them and their limitations, but be careful to cleanse and purify ourselves from those kind of disparaging remarks.
Beautiful. Thank you, Linda. Well, let me ask you, what are some of the essential skills that we need to cultivate in order to create optimal relationships? Like, you're building your tribe now, and it sounds like you're building a very intentional tribe of optimal relationships. What do you recommend we do? What are some of the essential skills we need to have for that?
Well, I would say that one of the primary skills that we all need to become competent in is the skill of managing relationship differences. Because particularly if you're going to surround yourself with people who share this commitment to honor their own truth, then what you're going to find out very quickly is that their truth isn't always the same as yours. In fact, more often than not, it may not be. Hopefully, their values are, and we want to find people who share common values, but there are going to be differences that will come up in all relationships. I don't care how much you love somebody, I don't care how long you've been together, but differences are going to come up. And if we don't learn how to honor the differences as well as the similarities, then we're going to create conflict, which is not a problem, but it is a problem if we don't know how to work through the differences that become conflict. So most of the work that we do with couples is, what brings them to our seminars and our work basically is that they've experienced some breakdown in their relationships. And they're lacking certain very fundamental skills sometimes in terms of navigating through those potentially treacherous waters. And we frame it not so much as a pathology, as that this is like a medical problem that one or both of you have. We really relate to this as a learning deficiency, that this is something that you haven't learned, that most of us didn't learn. Certainly Linda and I didn't learn it when we were growing up or in the early stages of our relationship. But it is something that we can learn. We can learn how to deal with and manage the strong reactivity that we can have when somebody says something that triggers us. And we all have the potential to be triggered at times when a raw nerve is touched in us emotionally. And so that's part of the process of managing differences, is managing our own impulsivity, our own defensiveness, our own desire for control, rather than just being possessed by that and then activating somebody else's fear and anger and resentment. So this, I would really put that at or near the top of the priority list in terms of skills that need to be developed, because it's going to happen. You're going to find yourself in situations with people, with your beloved even at times, in which you're going to need to call upon some skills that will enable you to work through this without getting stuck in it. Because if you get stuck in it, you're really in trouble, because it's going to be something that you're going to be distracted by until you get a grip on it. So that's one that I would put at the top.
That's great. That's right. I love what you said, Charlie, that it's not like people are bad or anything like that. It's because they have a learning deficiency.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the way you're framing that. And, one of the things I would like to start getting into now is talking about relationships, talking about honoring differences and working through them. You both wrote the book, That Which Doesn't Kill Us, which describes your journey of your marriage and some really challenging situations that occurred that almost broke you apart for good. I mean, there was like depression, infidelity, power struggles. I mean, these are issues that many couples deal with. I mean, you covered the gamut. So I'd love to hear from both of you, maybe each one of you separately, about some of the key lessons you learned in that journey, or whatever it is that you really want to impart, that calls you to impart. And if you can share with us by speaking in the imperative, like, I recommend doing this, or don't do this, or or something like that. Just some really potent messages you want to impart with us from your journey.
Yes, thank you for asking. And I would want to impart to the listening audience what wisdom I took away from that ordeal. We went through a time that was so challenging that it didn't look like our marriage was going to make it through it, because Charlie was so involved in his career and flying all over the country, teaching that he was away from home when the children were very small. And I got put in the position of being the traditional wife. And I didn't have any desire to be in that position, like a 50s wife, bringing up the kids, virtually alone. And I was so angry. So we had to learn higher warriorship skills because we had this irreconcilable difference that was threatening to burn us up. But I learned other really powerful lessons during that time. And it was about commitment and caregiving and supporting his dream to excel in his career. And it called upon me, I thought I was strong in commitment, but it called upon me to reach down deeper and find even more devotion and more love and more support to help him to manifest his dream and to step out on trust and faith that reciprocity wouldn't come right away necessarily, but it would come back later. And I'm here to testify that it came back later and then more so, even more than I had allowed myself to dream. And the separation that we went through during that time when he was traveling so much from his work, I hated it. I was so lonely. I was so in resistance to it. But framing it as the archetypal journey, it forced me to become more self-reliant, to make decisions on my own when I didn't even have phone access to him a lot of the time. And it forced me into wanderer work, individuation that I never would have done if I hadn't been forced into it. So to have the grand overview that some of the ordeals in our life really shape us into who we can become. And some of them aren't so wonderful and we wish we didn't have to go through them. But if we decide that we're going to stay in a relationship that has serious challenge, to at least use it to learn more about ourselves, about our own shadow, about our own resistances, about our lack of skill, and take it on as an opportunity to learn and grow. And of course, I always need to add a caveat because there's some people who stay in a relationship that really is wrong for them. They're in a mismatched pair and they stay too long. But that wasn't the case with Charlie. There was a lot of love there on both sides. And I knew that I loved and adored him and I respected him and admired him. And I felt that it was worth doing the work to hang in as long as I possibly could. And I'm glad that I didn't bail because we broke through to a whole level of relationship that I didn't even know existed, that it was just in my imagination that was, it's so magical and we've really been enjoying it and delighting it for decades now, but it was a hard journey there for a while.
Mm-hmm. How did you decide to stay in? I mean, you mentioned some things that you decided to focus on your own growth and confronting your own shadows and develop skills to become more committed and individuated. How was it like emotionally? What did you do to stay in it, to keep your heart lifted and trusting? As you said, I mean, sometimes you couldn't even talk to Charlie about it. You had to just go within.
Yes.
So what did you do?
I took on forgiveness meditation as my spiritual practice for an entire year. And I really had a lot of forgiving him for not being father charming and spouse charming. But the hardest work for me to do is to forgive myself for not being mother charming and spouse charming, because we were fighting a lot during that time. And the forgiveness meditation really helped me to soften my heart that was getting kind of closed and crusted. And that was one thing that helped me tremendously. I could calm down enough so that the one day a week that we would have together, we could really make a physical and emotional connection with each other that was just enough to put in my empty soul tank to get me through one more week. And so we learned about making every minute count, to prioritize our relationship, to put the differences aside, and just to connect with each other. And that was an essential ingredient in making it through the darkness. And last but not least, I wouldn't want to neglect saying we got some good help from people who were farther along the path than we, from couples who had been through some dark times and lived to tell the tale and became stronger at the broken places. And I used them as a model that I could make it through it and end up stronger as an individual. Charlie could be stronger as an individual. We could be stronger as a couple and stronger as a family. And it was going to take more of me than I had any idea that it was going to. Nobody ever told me your relationship sometimes has to die in the old form that it's in to give birth to a new form. But, you know, fortunately we made it. We got some good help, and I'll be forever grateful for the people who helped us.
Beautiful. And how about you, Charlie? What did you learn? What was something that really resonates with you that you want to impart with us?
Oh boy, how much time do you have?
I know, really. I know, really. I mean,
a lot.
mhm.
Let me just give you the kind of the top of the iceberg. Well, probably one of the most important things that I learned was something that we refer to as enlightened self-interest, which, for those listeners here who are not familiar with that term, what it refers to in the context of relationship is the awareness that what I can do for and give to my partner that enhances their well-being comes back and enhances mine. That's kind of the Buddhist phrase of karma, that what goes around comes around, that what I give is going to come back on me to the same degree. And I got that not as a concept, but as a living, breathing reality. That knowledge did not come easy. I had to go through a lot of suffering before I got to that point. And I know that you read the book, and so you know some of the details of what Linda and I went through individually and collectively. So I don't want to kind of give the impression that, oh, you just kind of believe that and everything is going to work out. No, it's not the way it works. You've got to really find out through the experience of failing. And I failed. I failed to pull it all off. I failed to get to the point where Linda would finally come around and stop needing and expecting me to provide for her. I failed at being able to have it all, which is one of the things that I was trying to teach in my work. I felt hypocritical. I felt in some ways like a failure. And when I didn't have my arrogance and my ego to hold on to, I dropped into that feeling of failure and hopelessness and despair and grief, a lot of grief. And that all turned out to be an incredible blessing and gift for me. And I have been grateful for that experience of hitting the wall and crumbling in the face of it, because it's what opened up the door to my awareness that I had it backwards, that it wasn't about me getting more from Linda. I was getting plenty from her. I just wasn't really able to receive it because I wasn't giving to her. I mean, I was to some degree, but not nearly what I could have been. And I saw that. And that did it. I had a very powerful redemptive experience in which I just really came to terms with that. And it felt like a horrible failure. But that failure opened the door to taking the next step in my life, which required me to get my priorities straight, required me to reassess my commitment to my work, which, despite my protests that I was more committed to my family, was not true. I was more committed to my work. And I saw what that commitment was costing me and Linda and the kids. And I just turned to her in the face of this profound emotion that I was feeling and realizing this. And I said 2 words. I just said, "It's over. I'm done." And the next day I quit. And that began a new chapter in my challenge. Enlightened self-interest has been one of the guiding guideposts of my life for several decades now. And Linda used the term "stronger at the broken places." And that's the name, that's the subtitle of our book. And it's also the name of one of our courses, because we're both profound believers in the notion that it's the broken places that we have to turn to create the healing that we need personally and interpersonally. The broken places in ourselves and the broken places in our relationship. Those shadowy aspects that we try to avoid and run away from and deny. Like I said earlier, we've got to be willing to lean into them and to learn from them and to embrace them. And that's what's so radical about outrageous aging, is that it's counterintuitive. It goes against so much of what we've learned, what we've absorbed in the cultural mythology. And I also learned a lot about one of the myths of the cultural mythology that I had bought into, that I finally was able to challenge and eventually reject, which is the myth of the hero, the myth of the self-made man, the myth of independence. None of us are independent.
Mm-mm.
We're all interdependent. We all have to accept the part of us that depends upon and needs and requires support from other people. And I had been very committed to proving that I didn't need anybody. And worse, I was teaching that to other people, maybe not necessarily using the words, but that was my message. Don't be dependent. You got to make it happen. If it's to be, it's up to me. You got to do this yourself. And so I was pretty embarrassed. It felt like I needed to go back to all those people that I had, sold that story to and say, "Whoa, wait a second. No, let me put in a correction." But of course, it was a little too late for that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not really too late, because that's what we're teaching now. And we can all redeem our past mistakes and our past misjudgments and our past errors. We can redeem all that by committing to live our life from a different place from now on. And that's really what both Linda and I have done. And the payoffs have been just indescribable, beyond words. If people could see what is possible for them, if they really accept the responsibility of taking this path of self-actualization and relationship actualization, they wouldn't waste another moment not accepting it. They would just jump into it right now.
Wow. I was about to ask you both if there was any last thoughts that you had to share with our audience after sharing your beautiful journey and the lessons you learned. But Charlie, you just said it. It's like, jump into it right now. It's like that, the whole notion of outrageous aging. It's like that, as you mentioned, the whole notion of enlightened self-interest. Was a beautiful one, and I really appreciate what you both have shared, both in the lessons you have learned in your life, what your notion of outrageous aging is, and what that means in relationship and devotion to not only your own self, but to each other, but for others as well, and how to find the balance and between self-care and doing that. So thank you both for the profound wisdom that you've imparted to all of us. And I just really recommend to everybody that you get hold of their book, That Which Doesn't Kill Us, because it really is something quite an inspirational story about what is possible. As Charlie said, see what's possible and see what can happen through it and through the other side when you keep devoted on that path. So thank you again, Charlie and Linda, for being with us.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's been a pleasure.
My closing remarks would be that we're all elders in training. And I doubt that your listening audience has very many people who are in their 20s and 30s. They're probably midlife people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. But even at those tender young ages, we're still elders in training. And if we are going to evolve into wise elders, there are going to be a lot of tasks that we're going to be given in our life. And if we take them on as challenges, and that no matter what these challenges are, no matter what these tasks are, they can grow us into a more self-actualized being, go all the way to the top of the charts, to magician. And it isn't really magic, it's just that we've learned so much in life that it looks like magic, but that we become the wise elders that we have the potential to be. And I can't say enough about the closest relationships as the catalyst to move us there. And I'm from the school of thought that it's the fast track to enlightenment. So I really want to leave the listening audience with the eagerness to take on the big challenges in their life, and the big challenges, especially in their relationships, as an opportunity to learn a lot about themselves. Don't give up on them too early. Examine them for what is it that I'm to be able to learn and grow from this ordeal that I'm facing. And that it can get easier as we learn and grow. Our relationships can be more delightful and joyful.
Beautiful. Thank you, Linda, for those final thoughts. Excellent. Wow. Well, thank you again, Linda and Charlie, for joining us today. And listeners, you can find Linda and Charlie at their website, www.bloomwork.com. That's B as in boy, LOOMWORK.com. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you for joining us for Thriving in Your Third Act, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more, visit thrivinginyourthirdact.com. To join our global community of people awakening to their divine humanity and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for gathering with us and sharing this empowering path with your friends and family.